Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's special selection comes at us from Crystalia. This is probably my favorite song by them. We're looking at Failure today. There's a remastered version and the original version. I like them both for different reasons because the ending changes a little bit on the remastered version, and I like the original one more sonically. But you can decide on which to listen to. There's just something about this song that sticks with you. It's so haunting, so human. We're looking at the track Small Crimes off of the 1994 Magnified album. We're going to be looking at the original, primarily because it's the one that's on Spotify, but also because I think with remastered stuff, unless it's just a sonic change, which is usually what happens with remasters, I want to hear the original version of the song. I don't know if that made sense. Usually remasters are just sonic, so I don't mind listening to those, just updating the sounds of it. But if there's actually compositional changes, I want to listen to the original first. So that's also why we're going to be doing this one here. Let's dive into it, see what Failure is bringing to the table today with Small Crimes. Definitely an interesting sonic palette. Very eerie. Is that the bass? I think it is based on note. It feels topsy-turvy. Usually you want a big foundation and you put your thinner stuff on top of it so it makes a nice pyramid. And this feels like all the weight is at the top of the song. And it's all teetering on this very light, airy vocal stuff that's sitting on the bottom. Yeah. Lots of dissonance. Really leaning into that too. The guitar and first vocal were already dissonant, but the second vocal harmony just leans into that even more. Very grungy though in melody. Yeah, I'm digging that. Ooh, we still have 2 minutes left. Interesting. Oh, like beautiful little melody on top there. Bass kick is massive underneath all this. More noise, dissonance. Yeah, interesting track. Very messy, but ultimately something that I'm intrigued by. Now, the first thing that stands out to me, of course, is the production. Right from the start, you just get that meaty guitar tone, right? Fuzzy, large, booming, primarily playing lower tones. And then you get that quiet vocal that kind of sits under it. It's ethereal, it's quasi whispery. As I mentioned, this feels inverted to me. A lot of the times that I bring up vertical placement of instruments, it's usually within the realm of pitch. And I think people have caught on to this as well. Whenever I hear a line that's higher than another, it's usually playing higher notes. But this is different. I hear the bass, well, the bassiness of the guitar over the vocals, even though that it's playing a lower note. It feels suspended above it, maybe even trying to balance on top of it. As I mentioned, it feels like an inversion of the typical production pyramid of making your foundation the biggest portion of the track so it can hold up all of the other ideas as they become less and less large until usually hitting your melodic part at the very top, which is usually in this realm of music, your vocal line. This feels the inversion of it though, and the whole song feels like it teeters, but that's also what makes the moments when that massive guitar is removed, what makes them feel so different. It's those moments that feel like a massive weight of relief pulled off of me. And it's not so much just that the big guitar sound's gone, it's literally that the big guitar sound is no longer putting so much weight on the rest of the track. It's not just that it's disappeared, it's that there's a semblance of foundational structure now present as we get the lighter guitars. I think acoustic? Nah, probably clean electric, sitting underneath the vocals now and sort of building up the pyramid as it should be. It's what makes it feel so disorienting when that guitar comes back, moving out of this section back into that verse again. I find this to be fascinating because, as usual, from a production angle, I have no idea how this is done. I don't know why it feels like it's upside down, but it does to me. And so it creates basically a feeling of being flipped upside down, of gravity reversing every time that this instrument comes in and leaves. Those sections aren't just changing from one type of sound to another type of sound. It literally feels like my world is getting reversed alongside it. This wasn't something I really picked up on until I think the second time that the heavy guitar was removed, and I really felt the jostle of this removal. Just the entire way I felt changes when that guitar is present and when it leaves. Yeah, and just topsy-turvy is the best way I can describe that. It is absolutely bonkers just how much weight that instrument can throw around, how much it can change the feeling of the song by itself. It just blows my mind. But it also sets a specific tone for the song. It is a very aggressive sound. It does present texture primarily, but it does have a harmonic quality to it. Primarily, it creates a chord for the vocals to sing against. And what the vocals sing isn't always in tune. That is to say, that we get dissonance oftentimes when the vocals are playing alongside a guitar, which is like 90% of the song. It adds to the tension of the song, it adds to the anxiety of the song. It helps it feel like generally a mess. It's noisy. There isn't a single moment of, well, actually, there is a single moment of the song. A really beautiful, I think it was the first instrumental interlude after the big guitar left for the first time. And we primarily had drums, bass, and guitar. Oh, it was a warbly bass section. Yeah, and then the guitar that's doing a little melody on top of it. This was honestly a calming, beautiful, non-stressful section. The warbliness of the bass was interesting, but it wasn't anxiety inducing. It was still beautiful, even if I wasn't quite sure what I was looking at. That kind of feeling. But pretty much every other part of this song introduces some sort of negative harmony, some sort of dissonance to create some tension in the track from a chordal perspective. Most of the song has a sonic tension to it with that heavy, weighty guitar sound. And I think those are the two main areas that we get tension from: harmony and sonic and texture. Regardless, there's very few moments of this track that have any sort of relief to them, and even that one section that I said doesn't have a lot of tension in it does have a sort of haunting quality to that lead guitar line. Basically, nothing in here feels completely safe or perfect or clean. I'm curious what the song is about lyrically, primarily because of where all of this goes. We have this general loose structure of verse, chorus, and interlude. We bounce between the three of those in some sort of pattern. I didn't quite pick up on it. The song does move rather slowly, and for having a 5-minute song, aside from the outro, which we'll discuss in a second, those 5 minutes don't really have a lot of differentiation to them. It's a similar vibe throughout with similar composition throughout that works within that atmosphere to deliver small variations on this core emotional theme. But then we get to the 5-minute mark and it begins to fade out. And I'd like to know what this represents. I was anticipating something. 2 minutes to go in the song, we faded out to nothing. If you watch the visualizers over there, the volume bar turned into a little orb at the bottom and then disappeared completely. The orb means that there's still sound, though it's quite indiscernible to our ears, or at least to my ears with my equipment. Maybe if you have higher volume or better speakers or headphones or whatever, you might be able to still hear what's going on. I heard basically nothing at that point. But when the orb goes away, there is literally no sound being delivered anymore. And we did hit that point. For a couple of seconds, there was absolutely zero sounds. Now, like I said, I figured something was going to happen, but I wasn't quite expecting this, which is just to fade the song back in. This isn't the first time I've heard of it, and the example that comes to mind immediately is the track Men Are All the Same from The Used off of their fourth album artwork. It's the final track. It is a culmination of a lot of themes on the album and even pulls back a refrain from an earlier track, which is like, I love that song. Anyways, it does sort of the same thing, fading out an idea and then fading it back in with some variation, which is what happens here. I'm curious what it represents in this track, though. It's very uncommon. You don't hear it too often in any music. But what it does bring in the end, its variation, is it brings back the foundation with guitar melody on top of it. Not electronic, digital. It brings back distorted guitar work on top of it. Every time that we've heard the guitar melody previous to this has been on clean electric or acoustic, one of the two. We have not had distorted melody from a guitar. And that makes this section at the end of the track special. It's unique in a lot of ways, but it doesn't just give us a straightforward melody like we've experienced prior. It is messy. It's dissonant and it's distorted. There's destruction in it. It's not quite as big and massive as that core guitar sound we've had throughout this track, but it also isn't clean and vibrant like the other guitar sound we've had. It sits in the middle of them, and musically it does as well. It is gnarly. It plays around with dissonance and noise. There's that tremolo pick section where it just kind of plays quickly and a lot of notes that don't work well together, creating a lot of clashing sound waves. But there is a beauty to it. There's something gorgeous about the messiness of it. But I'm still curious what it all means. I like the outro, but why does it come after the fade out, fade in? And I don't think I'm going to get this one answered, but why choose to do an electric guitar over it with distortion rather than the clean electric that we had previously that's given us melodies prior? What's the reasoning there? I don't think these are going to be answered today. I'd like to hear from Failure, but I highly doubt they're going to drop by the channel to answer this little question on a small channel. So, but I am curious about it. I think there's a lot of really cool symbolic things going on in the ending that I don't think I'm going to get answers for here. Um, I guess just one other note that I like on the topic of variation is the vocal delivery. I mentioned that when we have the really big guitar sound over top these vocals, they're airy, they're ethereal, they're borderline whispery, they're just not full bodied at all. It's very timid and full of air. But when we get to the chorus, when that sound is gone, the vocals are very full bodied. Now, I know this only happens once. The full bodied vocals do come by it later with the heavy guitar on top of them, so it's not like it's a story being told there about being able to be more of yourself without some creeping thing over your shoulder. Although maybe that's still something that's in here, but that's not really how I'm reading it. But I do like how, at the beginning at least, we have this little micro thing going on here where the vocals are allowed to become more full bodied and projected at a moment when this guitar stops looming over them. And allows them to remove the weight of trying to hold it up and allows them to hold themselves up. That's kind of what I heard there. But again, the rest of the song doesn't really support that reading. But there is a little bit of dissonance there with the vocals and the guitar. And then we eventually bring in a second set of vocals that adds to the dissonance of the whole thing. What I like after this, though, is we return back to a verse, but where there were pockets of silence in the vocal line, they're filled in with a vocal that's pushed off to the side. And there's a little bit of a call and response to this. Just a nice little added texture to it that also might have a storytelling aspect to it, as well as there's the call and response. There's a displacement between the voices temporally. They're not singing together, but also spatially, where they're not both in the same channel. One's center and one's pushed off to the right. So I'm going to take a second. We're going to read some lyrics and see if I can't figure out what the song is trying to say outside of just the overall tension I feel within some of the more beautiful moments, but certainly within some of the heavier, darker moments. Very rarely do I have zero thoughts about some lyrics. Usually I can cobble up something, even if it's based on just a couple of lines, and say I'm probably extrapolating on this idea, but maybe it's about this. I have nothing here. I think it's because it is vague on the surface, almost to a fault, that each of the metaphors maybe connects on some level, and then they can connect to mean a third thing combined, but at least on a level 1 and 2, which is usually where I come at the lyrics. I don't see any way how all of this works towards any unified concept. But there are a couple of cool things I want to talk about. Primarily, there is a feeling of incomplete information, which also is how I feel about this. It's a series of sentences that I kind of get in isolation, but I don't see the connection to them. Verse 1 says, "Small crimes, smiles stretched on old trees, strike your match so lightly, watch the crooked smoke rise. Empty prayers to heaven, just a mask of blue sky, look away to..." And then nothing. They get cut off by the warbly bass and clean guitar melody solo, an instrumental break as it's written in the lyrics. We don't even understand what the end of this verse is wanting to say. There's a second verse that leads into what is listed as a break. I'm not entirely sure what that is, but it's a quote. Somebody is saying this, unlike most of the rest of the track, which I assume is said by some sort of omniscient voice. It says, "Whatever turns you on is fine with me, as long as you..." And it once again is cut off, though I'm not sure by what. It could be the bridge starting up next. I don't remember how the music went at this section. The bridge, interestingly, does this in reverse. One point says, "Burned prayers turn me on to nowhere, sick and empty. I don't feel so bad now. Before starting a quote, but in the middle of it, there is a dash ever turns around again, she said to me softly. I don't know what came before that. That's obviously the end of a sentence. So we have two sentences that get cut off early and one sentence where we only hear the last portion of it. And I tried to piece any of this together, maybe thinking that there were some thoughts that might be between the beginning of a statement and the end, and that doesn't quite work either. So, yeah, out of the five stanzas in this track, three of them have incomplete information within them. There is one concept that gets brought up often. It's fire of some sort. It says, strike your match so lightly and watch the crooked smoke rise. That's in verse 1. The bridge says matches don't get wet. Later on, bringing up the burned prayers, as I had mentioned earlier, and a quote that says, start the fire now. Freedom's not so great, all fears burn up. The final verse, which has the back and forth of the vocals, one of the lines says, hold on, found my tangled forest, growing, got my driest summer, small crimes held my matchbox tightly. Now, I am not sure what any of this has to do with one another, but it is something that consistently shows up. Incomplete information and fire, particularly matches. I I don't know what to make of it though. Verse 2, I think, is the most mind boggling stanza here. It says, small crimes, kick the dog for eating, leave your old self hungry, watch in coldest pleasure, tell the world. I can kind of see where some of these can have a secondary layer, the metaphor. What does the phrase mean, and how those metaphors could be tied together, but it sits just outside my grasp. And I think if I could unlock this verse, which I'm the closest to, it might give me the key to figuring out what the rest of the song is, but it's just written so cryptically despite having these little breadcrumbs everywhere. And maybe that's the point of it, too. Interviewing Greg Edwards, half of this band, says the song originally had an entirely different set of lyrics written by Ken, who's the other half of the band, and it was originally called Small Bird. Greg later rewrote the lyrics to fit the track's more menacing tone. Quoted, I'm not sure what Ken was doing with the little birdie, but I had a strong attachment to the music and melody and really wanted the lyrics to address the subtle menace behind every moment, which was a result of the mind's tendency towards symbolism and paranoia. And maybe I am trying too hard to find some sort of symbolism in this. My mind does tend to look for that. What does everything mean? In fact, I think I brought it up 2 or 3 times in the analysis section. I can't wait to figure out what this means, what the ending means, what the guitar tone at the end means. I am looking for symbolism, and maybe the song is supposed to be about that. Not necessarily that everything is symbolic. Maybe all of this is purposefully just an allusion towards symbolism. Maybe it's not supposed to represent anything in general, except for the idea that we tend to look for meanings in things. Maybe the patterns in here are completely circumstantial and were not intended to be present like that. I don't know. I have a real tough time grasping any of this. There's no annotations on here to hear other people's take on the lyrics. And the person who wrote them isn't really helping either. They're being a bit obtuse about what it's about. Uh, so I'm just left with my experience, which I enjoyed, as is pretty typical with Failure. This was the album that came out what was it called? Fantastic Planet. This one's called Magnified. It came out 2 years prior. It's interesting to hear sort of a foundation for a lot of the ideas that I ended up hearing and enjoying in Fantastic Planet, and it makes me want to dig a bit more into their back catalog, as well as see where they went from Fantastic Planet, because I don't think that I checked out much after that aside from a couple of tracks here and there. With that said, though, these are my thoughts on Failure's Small Crimes. Let me know yours. What does this song mean to you? What was your experience with it, your interpretation of it? Let me know if you think I was on to something with any of my observations or completely in the wrong ballpark and you have a totally different take on things. Put all that stuff down in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you to this menu right here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC as usual. We're going to wrap up this week's theme of favorite riffs. We're going to look at our final track that was selected because it has a really sick or memorable riff in it. And then we'll wrap up this week with some brand new music from Dear Mother. I greatly enjoyed their last album and have been looking forward to what they're doing next. So I'm excited about it. I hope you all are. Alright, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.